All right, and we are recording. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Kate Simon here, head coach of Glover U, and I'm so grateful that one of our coaching clients and who's really becoming a good friend of mine, Cheesette Cowan, is joining us today to have a very real, very frank conversation about not only what's going on in the fabric of not even America, but the world right now as it relates to racism and anti-racism, but really having a dialogue about some of the things that have been on the minds of non-blacks for allies who want to help and support this movement. So Cheesette reached out to me last week. We were having some dialogue on Facebook just about what's been going on, and in having that dialogue, we both agreed and figured that this is probably a conversation that other people out there can benefit from. And it's been a lot of reading and research on my part, and just trying to do my own anti-racism work, and a lot of grace and patience from Cheesette for helping guide me and guide some of us through this right now. So today, I and we want to hold a space for Cheesette, for other people of color to have this conversation. And simultaneously, I want to give permission to any of the allies out there to not be perfect at this. As Cheesette and I have more or less talked about off air, is that this is a topic that's incredibly new for me personally, and that's embarrassing to say. It's not a familiar topic, right? I can hop on a webinar any day and talk about 10 areas to go get a listing right now, or how to run your business. But the truth of that is that's been something I've been working on for the last 10, 11 years. And this work is not, right? So I want to thank Cheesette for giving me grace. And I want to thank all of you who are maybe watching right now or paying attention or listening, to say thank you for giving me the grace to be human and maybe stumble through this a little bit, because it's not going to be perfect. And I think that's part of the message in having these dialogues, is you have to be willing to be wrong or be vulnerable in this position in order for us to learn. So a little bit of background information. I actually met Cheesette in the gym down in Orlando, 5:30 in the morning. And I was actually working out with Christina Griffin's husband, and he said, hey, I've got one more coming. And I thought, all right, cool. We'll see if she can keep up, kind of thing. And as soon as I met you, you like brought the fire, right? Like you were there to work out. And I got to know you a little bit, and I said, what's your story? Like, what's going on with you? And you told me, hey, I've lost 80 plus pounds already. And I said, because working with people in health and fitness, I'm like, that's a pretty large feat to do for anybody. So talk to me about your mindset in that. And you just said, I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I knew that my change was going to be up to me. So immediately I was like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. I'm here for this mindset.
That's what a coach loves to hear.
For sure. That's literally music to my ears. So I've completely adored you from the second that I met you, and just how you show up for yourself and you being a part of our community. And again, adding in this layer of realness, just, I'm, like I said, I'm really grateful that you're here to share with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and I want to hear from you. How are you doing with all of this? And I know that that's such a loaded question. There's so much going on. So talk to us. What does it feel like to be you right now?
To be me right now is unbelievably unstable, right? And it is probably the first time in my life that I've been able to say that I'm not okay, and to be okay saying that, because one of the things that is characterized, from the African American perspective, is you have to always show up, and you have to be better. You have to, and when I say better, not better than anybody else, but better than average. Just enough or good enough is not you're good enough. Your good enough is 10 and higher. So you always have to, you create this culture in your own mind. And I'm not saying that it's given to you, but it's the culture that I have to overachieve in order to just make it, right? Because if you look at it categorically, we're starting from behind, right? We didn't own land, we didn't have wealth. So we're starting a race that somebody is light years ahead of us. So to catch up, how do you bridge the gap, right? This is one of the things that when people talk about reparations, that really what they're saying is not saying that I want my 48 acres and a mule. It's saying that I need something in place to bridge the gap so that we can all start from the same starting place or be at the same place. Because that's what equality is. Equality is not, I have and then you have. It's that if I need more or you need less, it's we get whatever is going to make us whole and get us to a healthy starting place. So when you have that concept in your mind, you go through life and you create your own stability around your own performance. You become the competitor. You become the person that nobody in the room is going to outwork me. They're not going to out strategize me. And you literally spend a lot of time developing yourself in that way just so you can show up. And when you show up, you feel like you're showing up for your great grandparents that were slaves. You're showing up for your grandparents that worked to put your parents through college. You're showing up for your parents that put you through college while they were going through college because they started behind. So you're carrying all of that, and it's so subconscious, right? You're carrying all of that on your back. So then now what the recent turn of events are, because when you kind of start that cycle, any cycle you start after a while, it becomes normal. So it's just your day to day. You don't even think about the nuances of what you're doing every day. It's normal. Then what happened with everything that started to happen in our culture, triggered by largely by what happened to George Floyd, what it did was it didn't change what was going on with us. That stuff was always going on with us. It brought it out into a way that now the world sees it. And now for me, because the world sees it, it's like a break in the rhythm that was going on, because it was just my life before. Now it's a break in the rhythm because now I'm having a conversation with like people like you, with allies that I would have never had conversation with before. Now people are feeling a way that they would have never expressed to me before. They're thinking in terms of solutions and things that they would have never thought of before. So what that does to us is it opens up a layer that we had kind of just, kind of scaled over before. So now it's open. And now, like I told you before, the uncomfortable thing is for me now, I'm looking at some of these things that I've adopted into my life. And I'm like, do I still need that? Do I still need to like compete all the time? Do I still need to feel the need to be the best? How much of that is healthy? How much of that is unhealthy? Because there's a part of me, I want to show up 110%.
Right.
Right. But then there's another part of me that, okay, why do you want to show up 110%? Like, do you want to show up 110% because you just believe that's the right thing to do? Or do you want to show up 110% because you believe no matter how you show up, you're always at a disadvantage? And now you want to show up at 110% because you really want to be noticed. You want to be affirmed. Those are things that psychologically that are opening up to me now. And I'm like, okay, whew, we got a lot of behind the scenes work to do. So taking on that task is daunting because I still have an everyday life to go through too. I still have to show up in my business, and I still have to raise my kids and answer their questions and all that stuff. So it just, for me, the instability of it is, just knowing that going forward, I'm going to have to become a different version of myself, whether I like it or not. And for several reasons, because when you have somebody in front of you like you that's an ally, you want to be able to, one, explain your culture, your races, nuances, struggles, beauty, the things that are not just good, bad, but good. But then also you want to be able to, at the same time, it's all about introspection, right? Because if this doesn't change me as a person, how can I ever really partner with allies for larger change, right? Because if it's always a competition, then these conversations are not going to be conversations between allies, right? They're going to become conversations where I want to get my point across. I want you to understand this. But now I want to understand both sides. Because like the thing that I have loved about the conversations with you is you've been very real and transparent about what you're feeling, what you know, what you did not know. And see, sometimes from a Black perspective, we just assume everybody knows this. Well, not necessarily, because if we never sat down and really had the dialogue, but the dialogue has been so painful to have. And even sometimes when we have had it, there has been a lack of a willingness or desire to understand. So what that does is it shuts us down, right? Because I've talked to people even in the last 2 weeks that and you've communicated with me. I haven't expressed any anger towards you because anger is a secondary emotion. I'm not angry. What it is I'm hurt. My emotions are raw. There's a lot of feelings, but anger is not the dominant one.
Sure.
But they don't want to understand. And I think, like you said, because it makes them uncomfortable, so they shut the dialogue down. And that kind of makes me feel like, okay, if we're friends, why can't we have these conversations? You know what I'm saying? And these are with leaders. So I feel like part of being a leader is you should have something to say about everything.
Well, so many thoughts about everything that you just said. Number one, the quote that's like, I have two quotes that are resonating. My favorite one is by Brene Brown, and it says, "True leaders are never silent about things that are hard." Like, number one, if you step into a position of leadership, you do not have the luxury of like turning your attention away from what people are consumed by, good, bad, right, or wrong. Right? You do not have the luxury to turn away from this group of people. What's going on in the country right now? Like, so that's number one. And the second quote that, I read and I included in my notes was, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." And
Right.
So I have my own personal Instagram with fitness and stuff like that. And I started seeing very, very quickly after the video, surfaced of George Floyd, and people were posting, they're like, not to me, but to like Facebook influencers. And they were saying, "You want to be an influencer, what are you influencing?" And it like really hit me, right? You want to be a leader, but what are you leading? And while this conversation isn't necessarily about like what leaders should be doing or not be doing, you're absolutely right. There's an opportunity for those of us who are uncomfortable and unfamiliar to lead a dialogue about this, but also, be aware that it's not going to be perfect. There were a couple things you said in that whole segment that you just did that I there's so many layers that I want to dig into. Number one, I think there's probably a lot of people out there, myself included, right? Like, we've heard, do the work. This is white homework. You've got to learn how to be anti-racist. And we sort of assume that where you might be sitting, like, to me, my image is like, if I were in your shoes, I would be sitting back and being like, finally, cool, welcome to the party.
Right.
I'm here, I've been here the whole time. But you're communicating that while this dynamic is changing, it's forcing you to change as well. It's forcing you to say,
and that's why people don't want to have the dialogue.
yeah, like, what does that look like for you? Because you are in this world where us and them, and now you're probably feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, probably annoyed that you're having people like me or other allies that are like, "Hey, I'm ready to listen. What can I do?" Right? So it's almost forcing you to figure out, how do I now relate with these allies who haven't been in my shoes? So talk about that.
Well, let me talk about this emotional versus business level. So the emotional versus business level is that I can communicate with anybody on a business level because it doesn't require the me that is the real me to show up. So what we have seen for years is that blacks and whites relate well on a business level. The reason why these kind of conversations don't happen, because this is not a business conversation. This is an emotional conversation. And emotions, after a while, especially when we're communicating them, are going to be a real telltale into what you believe and how you think, right? So when you start to have these kind of dialogues, you're opening yourself up by virtue of just having them emotionally. You're exposing yourself. You and I both right here, even though we're at different parts or ends of the spectrum, we're both still right here in a very vulnerable space, because you're uncovering and exposing things that you may have not known, and I'm doing the same. People really, that's a lot of toil. That's hard to do. We don't even want to do that in our own homes.
Right.
I don't even want to sit down and have that conversation with people that are like family. So, and when I say that conversation, hard emotional conversations. So to have that kind of conversation with somebody that I'm typically only having business conversations with, but then to add the layer of race to it, it's like adding fire and then trying to control it at the same time. But then you want the conversations to be real, where you don't want to control it, but you're kind of scared about what might come out, right? Because you're like, if I let that go, it might burn the curtain down. So, just being able to admit that this is a hard conversation, and this is a conversation that if we have, there's got to be a level of transparency and a willingness to communicate on both sides. And when I say to communicate on both sides, so typically as an African American, what I have, there are conversations that I have with people that are African American that even I don't feel comfortable having with people that are not African American, right? And that's just kind of, so for example, when I'm talking about racism, right? There are just things that we understand because we experience it that categorically before now. If I tried to explain it to you, you wouldn't get it. So for me, what happens is we shut down. I don't even want to have a conversation because you're not going to understand, right? But the reality is what this climate in our country has brought is a level of where people want to understand, right? They're saying, hey, talk to me. I want to understand. So you know what that does for me as an African American woman? You can't shut down. You have to grow up. You have to level up emotionally and be able to communicate in ways that are not typical to you speaking to another Black person. Because there are colloquialisms, there are things that because we speak the same language and have the same experiences that what's understood doesn't have to be spoken, right? But when I'm communicating with somebody that's an ally, you need to be very clear. You need to be very concise with your words. You need to make sure that you're helping people that desire to understand you, because to me, you can't say to somebody, you don't understand me, but you're not giving them the opportunity to understand you because you just kind of feel like they'll never get it. And here's the truth. The reality is 90% of people won't ever get it. But there is a strong 10% that can lead the charge. They will get it. And then they will bring it back to the people that they speak to in those circles. So for example, it's no different than real estate. I don't like speaking real estate with people that are not real estate agents. I don't,
Right.
Because they don't get it. When I talk to people, they're like, you're always on the phone. That's how I make money.
Right.
I lead generate. People respond. They don't always respond when I call them, but when they call, I'm going to answer the phone if there's not anything pressing in my schedule. Nobody understands that. When you say that to people, they're like, but you're always on the phone. See, when you say that to a real estate agent, they're like, oh, yep, I get it. I mean, it's like, we get it. We hear, we click. But I don't, and it's the same dynamic. I don't even like having that conversation. My mother said to me, she said, every time I call you, you're busy. Okay, 10 to 1 is my lead generation time. You call me at 12. I'm lead generating. She's like, well, just answer your phone. No, 10 to 1 is my lead generation time. I'm lead generating. And she's just like, I just know that you're not available and I'm not going to call you anymore during the day. I'm like, I'm not trying to communicate that. But what I realize is it doesn't matter what I say to her. She's not going to get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because she's not in that world. And I think that's how we have felt all the time. It's like, it doesn't matter what I say, you're not going to get it because I'm not in that world. But here's the thing, this climate has changed where when you really want to understand something, because I was talking with my coach this week, he said the real meaning of love is understanding. When you really want to understand something, it's so much easier for the person to explain it to you. And that's what I'm seeing. That's the beauty of what I'm seeing. Everybody really wants to understand one another. And that's why I love having these dialogues, because I'm like, I want to be able to communicate to people that want to understand. And I want to understand, so when we talk and you said, these are things that I did not know. Do you know before now, if you told me that, I would have said she's lying. Internally, I would have said that. I'm like, how could she not know? But guess what that is? That's my perspective because it's so native to me. But now understanding says she's probably did not know. And now she's moving in this direction and we're going to have a beautiful dialogue.
So it's like every time you talk, I'm like, I want to write something down because I have these thoughts, literally.
That's why I pulled out my phone. I was taking notes. I'm like, I didn't have people.
Every other line, I'm like, oh my gosh. I would say one of the most prominent takeaways from what you just said was, holy crap, while this landscape in America is changing for us allies or for us non-blacks, of course it's changing for you too. And like, I don't know why that was like such a hard, like, I don't know why I didn't think of that before, but oh my gosh, it makes complete sense, because you're essentially mirroring what your surroundings are, right? What your conversations are. You're developing into who you need to be for the current landscape around you. And as that's changing, like you've identified, you need to change as well. So it's mind-blowing to me, because I've always, well, I and maybe some of the other allies I've been talking to, we've all been like, okay, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And really, there's a lot of change and there's a lot of work that's going on with you too. Now, the other thing that you said that I think is really important is that when we're having these dialogues, like you said, there's almost like this walking on eggshells feeling. What can I say? What can I ask? How do we do this? I want to make sure I don't sound racist, right? And like almost like self-preservation. And so I was listening to a podcast this morning. I'm gonna add it to the resources, but what he said was so profound, and I'm gonna probably butcher this. So this is part of the whole like, hey, I'm fumbling through this. And he said, there's a difference between feeling shame if somebody calls you out for racism and basically embodying that shame. Okay, so I know that I'm not explaining that exactly correctly, but I'm going to reverse to another train of thought that I had. And it's essentially, if I truly want to be an ally, if I truly want to be part of the solution, then I need to give you and other people of color complete authority to correct me if what I'm saying or doing does not align with my intentions to be an ally. Because it's going to happen. For as good of intentions as I have, there are going to be times where I mess up, or holy crap, I'm blind to something that I shouldn't be blind to. So there almost needs to be, if anybody's listening out there like, hey, how do I have this conversation? There almost needs to be a trusted relationship, whether it's publicly or privately, where you can say to me, hey, I know your heart's good, but what you said and how you're coming across is actually wrong, and here's why. Now, the second layer to that is I need to be okay with understanding that you're not calling me a racist, or you're not calling me a bad person, because what I'm noticing is there is like, when these dialogues come up, just like you said, there's this initial wall of defense from non-Black people where we all want to make sure people know we're not racist. Like that's the first thing, right? But when we're in this space of defense, we're not listening, and we're not willing to actually say, holy crap, you're right. I have completely missed the mark on this. Thank you for bringing up understanding, because what we're doing is we're holding on to this shame. Like, oh my gosh, I'm a racist. People are going to think I'm racist. And I have to work really, really hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. So what ultimately happens is the conversation isn't being had. Because
isn't that just the flip side of the coin I just explained to you, right? Because remember, it's the same thing. I said, we don't have them. So it's the flip side of the coin. But I want to add this to what you said. What you just described is what happens in relationships. Take the race out of it. You're married. When your husband is communicating with you, there have been times where he has said something and you're like, hold on, I don't like how that came across.
Yeah.
And he's like, I didn't mean it like that. This is how I meant it. We're so sensitive to race that we make that about race. That's what happens in every level of communication. As we're learning each other, you're going to say stuff. So I'm married, and one of the things that it took me a long time to realize, my husband would say, when I say something, I say what I mean. I always would think if he said something that he meant something else, and he's like, yeah, I don't function like that. I say what I mean. So he would say something. I'm like, well, are you trying to say this? He's like, no, I said what I said. I'm like, no, but it feels like this. Okay, that's your stuff. Like,
yeah.
I didn't say that. This is what I said. Let's leave it right here. Let's not try to be detective and figure out all the stuff behind it. And those are the kind of assumptions that really, on my part, just really express or show a lack or inability to really communicate.
Yeah.
So that's really what that is. If we take the race out of it, those same kind of issues happen with our bosses. They happen with our friends. You know, they happen.
It's like emotional intelligence, right?
It's like intelligence.
Emotional intelligence. It's like we can have a tough conversation
right.
without it being polarizing of me versus you versus me in this dialogue. We can have a tough conversation and say, I'm not here and I want to be involved on this subject, but I'm not yet, right?
But it's the tone of racism that makes it hard to push through. See, with you and your husband, there is no tone overlaying at the top of it. So you guys can work through that very quickly, right? When there is the element of black and white and racism, etc., it kind of clouds the work that we would normally do on a basic level. You know what I'm saying? It clouds that. And now we're not working to have basic level emotional intelligence. We're trying to account for the cloud, right? We're trying to work around the cloud, which means we're not doing the work on a human level, individual, one-to-one. Like, that's why I think this has really kind of put down the walls. It's like, like my friend Shauna said this. She said, we need to get good at probing, right? So before anything, it's just asking questions. Well, you said this. Did you mean that? Because, or what did you mean by that? Or I heard this, but I'm not really understanding exactly what you mean by that. Because that kind of brings the defense down, right? And now you can explain. And then when you explain, I can understand, or I can explain that's basic communication skills. That has nothing to do with racism or anything else. It's just basic communication skills. So again, going back to the things that I'm learning and why things are changing for me personally, I'm learning that some of the basic communication skills really need to be developed, right? Like when you kind of feel like you've achieved this level in business, it's hard to look at yourself and see holes. So those are holes for me that, and like I said, it is what it is. We all have holes, but those are things that now I gotta go address. That's right. I gotta address those things.
One of my favorite, I guess you could call it like a communication, principles is that if I or somebody else is having an extreme emotional reaction about a situation and it's disproportionate to the situation, meaning, wow, that's a really intense reaction, or that's a lot of anger, or that's a lot of frustration for something that's really just a conversation. It's always been my belief that it's something else, right? You're reacting to something else. So I think, if ever I'm super emotionally charged, and maybe this is something we can all work on, if we see an article, if we see a comment on Facebook, if we have this dialogue with somebody and we sense ourselves getting this like immediate anger or defense, usually that's an indication that there's something else within us we got to explore, we got to dig into, and we have to go deeper with that. We have to start asking ourselves questions on, where is this belief coming from? Where is this defensiveness coming from? What about myself and my life am I trying to protect right now? What about myself am I trying to keep the same? So, there's a little bit of, and that's a whole different conversation, because we're essentially asking the human race to be at a level that some of them, are capable of and won't be capable of. So that's got to be frustrating.
Exactly. I agree.
I heard a comment, and I don't know if it was on a podcast, but it essentially said that, at least for us, like non-Blacks, we need to more or less be comfortable with the idea that there is no, I'm not racist. It's, to what degree are you racist? And to what degree are you doing the work to be aware about it and fix it? What do you think about that? What are your thoughts when you hear something like that?
I think that there's a part of that, a remnant of people that's going to apply to. But I think there is also people that just, because it's not part of their world, they don't know. And I think that when you don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, I guess you could fall in the category of to what degree, because I feel like we should be aware of the world around us. But there are a lot of things that don't make my consciousness, and for several reasons. So I really feel like the world that we're in today, we have to take proactive steps to make sure that we are loving people. So when I said to you, I said that there's let me give you this example. This is the only way I can kind of spin it, is for me, raising Black daughters or African-American daughters, what I have to always tell them is they're smart, they're pretty, they're enough, they matter. And I always wonder, I'm like, do white women have to do this with their daughters? Because it's a whole project, like seriously. And they're not big. I mean, I say they're 4 and 7, so they're not like teenagers where they have these trains of thoughts. So it lets me know that there's something that is unspoken that we all feel need to question whether we're beautiful. So to me, when I see that, that becomes something that I have to actively combat.
Mhm.
So to me, when I look at the flip side of it and how that applies to the world around me, I almost feel like we have to teach, or our allies have to teach their children from a young age that everybody is beautiful so that they can still grow up with an awareness that I'm beautiful, but so is everybody else. Because that is going to create an awareness that there are different types of people. Like the number of people that I've come into that are like, I never saw you as black. Like, I don't see color. And to me, I'm like, that's a problem because if you
Right.
don't see color, you don't see me. I am a black woman. How can you say you see me, but you don't see color? To see me is to see color. I am black, right? And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. There's nothing wrong with saying I see it. But what that tells me is that growing up, you just were able to look at this one thing and see that as the standard and not see differences. There's difference between man and woman. There's difference between father and son. There's difference between black and white. There's difference between up and down. Differences are what makes the world go around. It's the yin and the yang. So you can't tell me that these things don't exist because that's like saying I only see up. Okay, you only see up, but if you go to the top of a building, the building is going to show you that down really exists,
Mhm.
right? You get off that building and building is going to show you that down is real. So when you say I don't see color, it's like, I get it, but it's like we need to start at a young age just to really help all of our children just see differences so that when we grow up, it's like, okay, I see that you're different, but I still love you. I have, you're still a person. We're just different. And it becomes a normal part of life rather than to be 40 and 50 years old and say, oh, wow, um, I see color now. No, you should see it all the time because we see
Yeah.
it all the time.
Well, whenever I've heard that statement of like, oh, I don't see color, it's like, number one, like, yes, you do, unless you are physically blind. You
Right,
cannot ignore that there are obvious
right,
differences. But then, secondary, I think what's most hurtful about that statement, and I'm not sure, so, the camp of people that I see posting that, there's a piece of me that's like, I'm not sure if they fully understand why that's hurtful. And what resounds to me, and, obviously I want to hear from you, is that it's a total and complete invalidation. It's no different than if you were saying to me, I'm really hurt right now. I'm having a really bad day. And I say, well, there's 364 more days. Don't worry, you'll have good days. And it's like,
right.
no, but we're talking about this one bad day. It would be great to be heard right now. So it's like
Right.
this mass like invalidation for feelings, and that's hard to be okay with.
But that's the part when you said that, not saying that I'm not racist, but how anti-racist am I? That's the part that makes you think of that. It's like because you might not be racist, but is that a statement that's really reflective of of a one world view, right? Because it is invalidating. And here's the thing: when people say that to me, it does hurt. And I have to remember that they're not their intentions are not to hurt me. They're not saying it to be, mean. It's I feel like it's kind of like a staple blanket statement, like a canned response. When you say this, I say that. Like you're not going deeper into like I see color, but I'd rather you say I see color, but it doesn't matter to me. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, but don't pacify me with that I don't see color thing because I'm like, I see every color, I see everything. I see the beauty in everything. And that's one of the things that makes it beautiful is, like we talk about rainbows. That's one of the things that make rainbows beautiful is that they're all different colors. Right. So when people see that, I kind of feel like they emotionally just haven't went in. So I kind of just take that at kind of face value. But um, to I could see where like to a younger me, I'd be like, how don't you see color? And I'm over here doing acrobats to try to, normalize the
Right.
color of the skin I'm in.
And when I hear stuff like that, it's kind of like an admission that like you said, number one, it's a canned response because it was started somewhere. It's been repeated. It's now, like you said,
PC response. It's the PC response. It's the politically
correct. Like, hey, I'm
response.
not going to take a stance here. I'm going to say the safe response. All lives matter. I don't see color. And what I hear there is something about what you're saying to me is making me really, really uncomfortable. And if I actually turned my attention inward, just like what you're doing right now, I would have to dismantle my whole relationship with what's going on right now. And
Right.
that's really painful. And it's a lack of wanting to do that work. It's a lack of wanting to have the tough conversations and look in the mirror and think, holy crap, this has been here the whole time and I haven't seen it, right?
That's the hard part. Like that work with you, internal, going inside, that work is tough. I mean, like, and then it's almost, I would say it's tough, but I think the real thing that I'm trying to get at is it literally shakes you to your core. You literally have to bulldoze everything, and you don't even know if you're going to be strong enough to rebuild. You have to literally, it's like dismantling everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but I've spent 40 years building this. If I dismantle it, will it take me 40 more years? Will I die before I finish this this new work? Will what I build be as good as what I built so far? But here's the thing, it's knowing that your life is not erected by what you build. Your life is erected by who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Like who I am as a person is my life, not what I built. What I built is external. What I do, my businesses, my career, all that stuff is external. It's who I am as a person. And I think that when you talk about just doing that kind of work, that's the part that's the first step to change.
Mm-hmm.
Is just being willing to acknowledge that this thing has to come down, right? And and what happens next is going to be you have to rebuild. But if you don't ever acknowledge that thing needs to come down, so if you keep that response, I don't see color, you're going to go through your whole life and never grow because you didn't create an opportunity to grow. Like what you're doing with this platform is creating an opportunity for growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's you're willing to go back and look at things and restructure things and assess whether things are good or bad. That's why I told you what I'm doing. I'm looking at the tools that I've put into place in life and I'm saying, is that good? Do I need to keep that? Should I get rid of that? Like that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. And some people just, they don't want to do all that. And that's why when you have leaders that won't take a stand, what they're essentially saying is taking a stand is going to require me to do work that I just don't want to do.
Well, and let's just call out the elephant in the room. There's also a very, I mean, look, there's another element to this is what is this going to do to my brand? What is this going to do to my image? Right. I mean, there's always that. And I know that like sounds disgusting to say, but that's a reality.
That is a reality for real. And it's a reality from both sides. So when I made that video,
right.
Don't think I didn't think like, okay, I have friends that are non-Black. I have friends that are white. What are they going to say when they see this video? Because I wanted it to really communicate my emotions about the situation, but I didn't want it to come across as like I said, we're calling you out or saying you did this, you did that. But here's the thing, you got to be willing to just let it go. And then you open up the conversations and whatever you need to do to make amends, change or whatever, you do that at that time. But you can't, for fear of breaking something, not move forward.
But it's also like very much not your job to keep somebody safe and comfortable in their own anti-racism journey. In fact, I would say that allowing somebody to get to the point, the core of feeling really uncomfortable is essential, right? I mean, I posted something on Facebook a couple of days ago, little meme, whatever, about basically saying, you got to be uncomfortable for a while, right? And the whole premise of what I said was, at the root of discomfort is ultimately change, right? So it's that awareness that we need. So there's a piece of me that's like, I hear what you're saying, where you don't want to offend anybody at the same time. And yes, I believe there's probably a right way and a wrong way, which, by the way, we have to get over. If we truly want change, we have to get over that we're going to fumble through this. But there has to be that discomfort, right? We have to welcome that discomfort. And us who want to be supportive and who are allies need to sit with that and understand that it's not a personal attack. So something that I heard on a podcast this morning, it was like so profound to me because I've never thought about this before. And I'm going to share the podcast later. He said, and he does a lot of anti-racism work. He's like dedicated his life to it. He said, we'll call it, white people, black people. He says, white people experience anger, fear, and shame if a black person calls them out on racism. And then they pin that anger, fear, and shame onto that black person, right? Like, so if you were to call me out, if I would say something, you would call me out and be like, Kate, that's not cool. I would feel shameful. And then I would have almost a negative relationship with you or a negative association with you. Mm-hmm. When really the negative association should be with the policy writers who got us here in the first place, right? Like, let's just take George Floyd, for instance. The anger is not white versus black. And if it is white versus black, it's completely misplaced on a system or a process that led to that moment. That's where the anger should be. That's where the shame should be. Not on the person, not on the situation that's holding a mirror up and saying, hey, this is a reality and it doesn't look good right now. So it was this huge aha moment of, holy crap, the anger or the frustration on you, the victim, is completely misplaced. It should be the victimizer, not the victim.
But anger is a secondary emotion. So the first emotion is going to be something like fear.
Correct.
Right? So the fear is that inherently something is wrong with me. It's taking it in and making it personal. But we should never do that, because if you don't look at the situation correctly, you'll never even know that there's a victimizer.
So on that, and I want to be very careful with how I say this, because I don't at all want this to come across like, oh, I'm a victim, because that's not at all. He went on to say, so if you look at the systemic racism history, white people more or less find themselves in a position of being the victimizer and the victim. They're the victimizer of, let's say, in a relationship with somebody calls them out, but they're the victim of systemic racism that's been passed down in these thoughts, in these ideas, in this policy that's been perpetuated and spoken to us. And of course we can say, well, shame on us for not thinking for ourselves. But at the same time, and we talked about this yesterday, when the fabric of our country was sort of built on the back of slavery and it has kind of taken off from there, there are so many things that us as white people have been conditioned to believe that have led us to having these subtle or, really systemic racism ideas.
And here's the thing. I do think we're both victims in this. You are absolutely right. And we're both victims of a constitution that was created to separate, to create the white supremacist culture in the first place. No white person alive today created that.
Right.
That was handed down to you. The same thing is, for us, when the Constitution of the United States was erected, it did not include Black people were slaves. So when we begin to dissect the Constitution and it talks about we the people, it did not include Black people. Mm-hmm. So it created this devaluation system of white is higher, better, more supreme than Black. Mm-hmm. That thing has just passed down into all the systems, all the governments. That's why it's so convoluted. It's so hard to really dismantle little piece by little piece, because we'd have to start at the top again, right? I thank God for people that are in local government that do their part to impact change in their city. But the whole system that it was founded on, to me, is I'm not gonna say corrupt. It just creates this, right? It's broken. That's a better word.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm saying, so what happens is throughout the years, it's created this white is better type, scenario. So even subconsciously, it has affected both parties, because what a white person may believe is that what we call white privilege, it's not really white privilege. It's just the way that the system was set up, is that you were categorically labeled to be better. So you didn't do anything. You were born into a system and you just operated in that system. And you can create a personal system in your family, but that system still exists. And what that system has said to us is, subconsciously, we don't measure up, because the same system that's letting you say I'm at this level is also saying to us, you're at this level. Mm-hmm. So what we are trying to do in our everyday life is kind of level up. So, and when I say that this goes so far, like even in the Black community, it has created kind of like colorism, you know, like where we don't want to be dark because dark is more of a reminder that we're Black. So we want to go have biracial children so our children can look this way. But all of that is just a product of a system that has impacted all of our thinking. And I feel like if you ever read the book Outwitting the Devil, he talks about this hypnotic rhythm, how we just go through life and we don't ever challenge the things that were given to us, right? It's just hypnotic rhythm. It'll just keep going, keep going, keep going. But then something happens. When something happens, it's like, boom, it's like a rift in the system. And now everything's shaking. And now for the first time, I'm actually thinking, looking, seeing, I'm aware, or as we call it, I'm woke. Right, I'm woke. Because really, it's what he talks about is you're drifting, you're asleep. And the Bible talks about how you're asleep in darkness. So now what happened is there was an incident, a shift, and now everybody is taking a look. It's like when the alarm goes off, like I'm groggy, I'm waking up, I'm starting to see things different, and I'm starting to look now at the whole picture where before I was just functioning in a system. I didn't question it because this is normal, this is our life, right? We didn't question those things. And like I said, there are a lot of things that I didn't question. But now that we're kind of at this impasse where our rhythm has been interrupted and we're starting to see different things, now I believe is the time to really start having the dialogue about how do we dismantle this system, because the Constitution is and has always been inherently in favor of racism, slavery, oppression of Black people. So until we can kind of deal with it at that level, we're kind of just straightening up chairs on the Titanic, kind of. But this is the one thing that we discussed at the end of that documentary that we didn't get to because it was so long, is that millennials are going to change the world. And here's why.
Hey, finally we get credit for something.
No. They're so powerful because what they do is if they don't like something, they create something new, right? So the world, the way it was, they didn't like it. They created a virtual world.
Right.
They just was like, you know what? You keep that, we'll create this, right? And now virtual space is a thing. Literally, when you pay a company to help you advertise on Facebook, et cetera, you're buying virtual real estate, right? It is a whole culture that we didn't create. You and I didn't create it. I don't know if you're a millennial, but our parents didn't create it.
Yeah.
It was created, and then we now become a part of it. So what's going to happen is the world as we know it, they're going to change it, and it's going to be totally different because they think outside of the box. They don't want to just take what was passed down to them. And that's part of the problem that we have with them, because they interrupt the rhythm. Remember, everything in life flows by a rhythm. They interrupt the rhythm. They're like, yep, nope, don't like that. I'm going to create this over here. And it's a break. And every time there's a break, it just kind of weakens what's going on over here. That's why we have to live unreal, so to speak.
Right.
I meant to wear my Live Unreal shirt, but that's why we have to grow these businesses. We have to grow our influence. We have to grow our voice. We have to grow our knowledge so that we can start to create things that interrupt the rhythm, And anything that you keep consistently hitting at, it has to crumble because you won't stop. So if this doesn't work, I keep going. But my whole objective is to break the cycle, to break the rhythm. And we can do that individually, but so many times we're just infatuated with the status quo. Go to college, get a job. We're not trying to figure out what part of our gifts, our talents, our natural ability can we do to change the world, to put a break in the rhythm. And that's why I love millennials, because I'm like, they get it. I don't even know if they realize the coding that's in their DNA, but they get it. Like they're going to break something and they're going to build something new.
Well, and I think that's it's a good point that you're making, because what I'm hearing in all of that is that this is lifelong work. And I know it's been lifelong work for you and for other people of color, but for some of us allies who are like, okay, what can we do? I want to help. I think it's important to understand that studying and learning anti-racism is going to be a lifelong journey that we have to find a way to commit ourselves to much like I commit myself to the gym, much like you commit yourself to the business. It's like in other people, you know, commit themselves to reading the Bible and the faith and all of this. It's like we have to find a way to lean into these uncomfortable conversations and lean into these uncomfortable realities of how racism has shaped our country and not deny that it's there. So one of the most helpful videos I saw a couple weeks ago, and maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't, and for anybody else who's listening or watching, it's the YouTube video, The Differences Between Kevin and Jamal. And and they talk about the concept of systemic racism. And they go on to say, Kevin and Jamal grew up in very similar families, very similar dynamics. You know, Jamal grew up in a Black neighborhood and Kevin grew up in a white wealthy neighborhood. And then it goes on to explain how the property taxes funded the schools and the schools poured into the children. And it literally explained a lot more eloquently than I'm doing right now what systemic racism is. And now, as I've been kind of doing my own work in this, you know, I've been sharing stuff on Instagram, I've been sharing stuff on Facebook, and I had somebody message me and say, I don't believe in systemic racism. And, you know, I asked him to watch the video, you know, and that's in and of itself is, you know, for me, a frustrating conversation because it's like, how can't you understand this? But one of the things that I feel like is getting mixed up in this is that when we talk about racism, a lot of people's knee-jerk reaction is to find and defend why they might not be racist. And kind of like what we talked about earlier, even when the George Floyd video came out, I don't know of a single soul, at least on Facebook, that posted anything that was like, well, there's probably another side. Well, this, like everybody was like, this is not okay, right?
It was painful.
No, I didn't know anybody who was like, yeah, there's another side to this. So, and I was like, okay, well, great. They're not displaying personal direct racism. Having said that, we're not. Yes, personal direct racism is still there, right? And it's something you and I talked about. I mean, maybe it's like 10% of people that are like really like KKK, like super crazy. But it's the systemic racism, it's the process that we've all been swept up into, knowingly or unknowingly, that's creating these problems. And like you said, it's going to take generations of hard work uphill. So while you've been combating and you've been what you say is overcompensating to stay in the race, it's now time for us, the allies, to do the same thing. It's time for us to come together with you and fight that same fight. Because, and yeah, it is going to be an uphill battle. And I'm hoping that it's less of an issue for my kids. And I'm hoping that I teach them that it's less of an issue for their kids. It's not going to change in 5, 10, 15 years. It's going to be active work that we have to do. So
and all of those things that you're talking about with systemic racism, those things were birthed out of a system that's broken. So how can you expect the system not to produce systemic racism? It's broken.
Yeah.
It can't produce anything that's whole because it's broken in nature. So it is going to have
policy, right? It comes down to the policy that was written to support or oppress people. And, you know, we still see it today. I mean, we saw it 3 days ago that, you know, gays were just given the right to not be fired because of their sexuality. And, you know, I have a couple gay friends and we were talking about it and I said, I can't believe that this wasn't a thing. I can't believe that we're here in 2020. And they said, no, like literally, you know, at least in the state of Michigan, 4 years ago, they couldn't even get married, right? So it's just this whole thing of, we need to lean into the awareness of what the policy is and how that plays into the dynamics of what's going on right now. And granted, I don't know if I don't know if this is a perfect fit, right? I don't know if we know the answer to what's going on, but seeing things happen around the country, such as them banning the Confederate flag. And I know that some of these, you know, Confederate statues are being kind of taken down and stuff. It's like, wow, people are seeing and listening that a piece of our history, which by the way, was only for like 5 years, the Confederate flag even was like a thing. We're dismantling the things that have a very hurtful connotation. And while it's not perfect, while the work's not done there, how does it feel for you to see that companies and states and different governments are taking a stance against, you know what? No, we're not cool with the Confederate flag. Or know what? No, we're not going to have a statue that represents slavery. How does that feel for you?
A few ways. So the flags coming down and all that doesn't mean anything to me because I think it's really what's erected in your heart. But companies taking a stand mean a lot to me because it just shows good leadership. And I know that when good leaders The Bible talks about how when the righteous are in rule, the people rejoice.
Mhm.
When people that are good leaders have good hearts and good intentions, and they are for the people will rejoice.
Mhm.
They will be happy that these are the leaders that we serve, that these are the leaders that we're under. So seeing the companies take that stand really made me say they have good leadership. And if they have good leadership, that's a good indication that there's good leadership out there, and everything is going to rest on the shoulder of leadership, right? So I was inundated with the number of companies, like from Amazon to this, that sent letters like, we are not okay with this. I'm like, wow. Like, just that statement, and some of them were larger than others, but just the statement, and then a lot of times with the rapid ability to do something, like how Gary Keller created this social equality
Right.
program, and I'm excited that I've been nominated for our office to be a part of that. Thank you. But just to see those things, what they do to me, really more than anything, is just give me hope, right? Because we a lot of times are hopeless, because we're it's like we're looking at a, a erection of something that's so large that you really feel like, even if I shoot this rock at it, it ain't gonna make a difference. Right? But when you see that, it gives you hope that if everybody has a rock and we're consistently doing it, and we come together and we have one voice, one heart, that can change something, right? So when you see people getting on the same page, so TD Jakes talks about there's this comrades, constituents, and confidants. And comrades and constituents, the difference between the two is, one is people that you are for the same thing, one is people that you're against the same thing.
Mhm.
So there's still really no oneness. We're just for the same thing. And if that ever changes, then we're not comrades. And, constituents, the same thing. But when you start to see these things, you know that we're going down that level from comrades to constituents to confidants, right? We're building a deeper relationship so that we can be on one page in every level, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to stick together for anything to change. Because anything that's divided, and I'm talking about the nation, you can use your house, you can use your marriage, you can use whatever. Anything that's divided, it can't stand, because the division is gonna, it's kind of like we were talking about the competition thing. It's gonna create this internal thing, and it's gonna crumble before you really can get out there and do something. So to me, what I feel like America is doing right now is, it's a getting your house in order, so to speak. Like, we're kind of snipping out things that don't fit, and we're kind of trying to get on the same page. And it's a beautiful thing, because before we were kind of acting like, this is not even a book. No, this is a book, and I'm on one page, you're on another, but we're trying to get on the same page, and that's the beauty in everything. So that's why I said there's so much beauty coming out of it too, because you're seeing for the first time the understanding, and the understanding is what gets you on the same page. I don't have to agree with everything that you say. I don't need you to agree with everything that I say, but can you understand my perspective? Can you understand how this affects me? Can I understand your perspective and understand how this affects you? Because if we can get to that point, we can take this and say, okay, here's where we are. This is what we decided is best for us. And now you have to do something about it. But we'll never be able to say that if I think this is what I want, you think this is what you want. What kind of order are we putting in? That's just like ordering food at a restaurant, and you're ordering one pizza, and your husband says, I want cheese pizza, I'm allergic to pepperoni. You want pepperoni pizza, you're allergic to cheese. Okay, we're getting one pizza here. So
Right.
either we're going to change and get just anchovies and green peppers, or like, what are we doing here? We can't sit here and say, I want this, I want that, you want this, you want that. Well, maybe, we like hamburgers. So hamburgers are meat, and, it's greasy, so it'll make the cheese that we have feel better.
Right.
So let's just figure out how to kind of meet in the middle. And that's the part, again, going down to basic communication stuff. Basic communication is an exchange. It's but if you're not even having the conversation, so that's why I said when I seen the company start to send those emails, I was like, oh my gosh, that means they're having the dialogue. I talked to a lady that works at Moffitt Cancer Center yesterday. She said they had a company-wide Zoom with 6,000 employees where they just discussed race relations. And I'm like, that's so powerful, because what that led to is people outside of there having conversations. Like she said, people came up to her and was like, I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, she's like, I know that they were telling the truth, but you know, it's this understanding. And I think that this is what's priceless. So that gives me hope. It gives me hope, because there are times that I've been hopeless, because you just, like I said, you just feeling like this is a large system. We'll never be able to get in front of it. But at the same time, you know that there's power in togetherness, right? And everybody coming with the same thing. So what we saw with George Floyd, that wasn't a black or a white thing. That was a humanity thing. That was like the way that shook me to my core. Like I mean, I just remember looking at it and feeling like, even in that video when Jason said, he said, we crossed the line. Like that line was crossed. And in that moment, it changed everything. It made everybody feel unsafe, because it's like, if you cross that line, man, what other lines will be crossed? Like, this has got to stop. Like, that was scary. I mean, like, in every sense of the word, because it was also subtle. Like, it wasn't like a violent shooting. It was so subtle that it was just kind of like, oh my gosh, did that really, really happen? And then it really puts you in a sense of what else can happen. Like,
So
it's scary.
my personal experience with this, and maybe this is similar to some other people, but when that video came out, without watching the video, the first thing I thought of was, okay, it's another police brutality video. Race is at question. Cops, gonna get off, right? Probably not gonna get charged with anything. And wow, this is another video, right? And, after seeing the video and seeing the response from people, it was very clear very quickly that there was no gray area. There was no gray line. There was nothing to hide behind. And the simultaneous realization that came crashing down on me was, okay, now we've had other videos like that, right? Like, remember 4 years ago in Minneapolis, the Philander Castile, right? When he said, hey, officer, I've got a gun in my car. I'm going to reach for it. Officer lost his shit, right? Just flipped out. And again, people watching that video, it's like, oh my gosh, this is horrific. Yet the underlying thread was, if I was in that situation and I felt afraid and I snapped, was that something that I would have done too, right? Like, there still was that little doubt of question of like, well, maybe that officer really didn't feel safe. And I'm not saying it's right, but I'm sharing with you my own train of thought of how I've, like, embarrassingly excused it in the past of when I see a situation, it's like,
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
I
And
do.
when this video came, it was like, oh my God, there is no gray area. There is no moment where the officer like maybe freaked out and couldn't control. There was no moment of that. There were pedestrians begging him to stop. And it was like, that moment right there, I was like, oh my God, this has been going on for so long and I haven't seen it. And that hit me, right? And I think maybe that's what a piece of what has hit a lot of the allies is like, holy crap, this has been happening and I need to do something about it.
Right. And at the core too, it's that you were able to see for the first time the thought process that would make you feel like that was okay. Right? Because at no point did he need to have his knee on him. He was already restrained. At no point. And then the humanity of it, to hear him cry out like that for his mom, as a mom, like, you're just like, whew, like any mom, like black, white, whatever, any mom, like, just to see that, it was just kind of like, like it was debilitating almost. And that's something that we can't unsee. Like, I didn't even look at the video until probably like a week later, because I didn't want to, because I feel like it was just the same of what I already had seen and known. I'm like, do you really need to see another one? Because you already know that story. But that was different. I kept saying you kind of have to, but I didn't want to. But then when I seen it, I was like, this is different, right? This is not the same. And I think that what that did was it like you said, it was no gray area. It was no question. And it really just emotionally woke people up, because like I said, we all can cast over everything emotionally, right? Because we're like on to the next thing. That's what we do as a society. We hurt, we don't take the time to grieve, we don't sit in it, um we just kind of go on to the next thing. This thing is requiring you to sit in it. And that's why I said, you know what, you're not okay, and it's okay to sit in this. You don't have to breeze past this and get on to the next thing and it's business as usual. It's okay to sit here for a minute. It's okay. So then when you see the fallout of it, like the riots and all that, and people are like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. There's no reason to, destroy property. But you got to remember, the destroying of property is really an emotional outcry. It's somebody that is trying to say, I want to be heard. And if I have to damage your stores, your neighborhoods, etc., to be
Validation.
heard,
It's,
right,
it's
I'm going to do that. Right. I'm going to do that.
one of the phrases that I heard in this podcast was the heartbeat of anti-racism is acknowledgement. And when I see, for instance, when I see the riots and some of the stuff going on, obviously, and I know you agree with this too, it's like, yeah, of course, like we don't, in a vacuum, nobody wants their property destroyed, nobody wants to get hurt, but the bigger picture of how did we get here needs to be acknowledged. And one of the things that I can't make people see or unsee is that, there's outrage for the riots, there's outrage for what's happening there. And like, yeah, that's fair, that's valid. You're allowed to feel that way, but don't ignore how we got here. Don't ignore the bigger picture of how did this happen in the first place, right? Don't cry over a Target burning down, but not the system that put us in a position in the first place, right? So it's of course, sure, nobody wants to see the riots, nobody wants to see the violence, but in order for us to fully understand the riots, we have to understand what's causing them in the first place. And again, like you said, it means we need to sit with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, but we're as a culture, we medicate.
Mm-hmm.
Everything becomes a placation of our real emotions. That's why we have bars. That's why we have, when people are feeling, bad, they go to the bar, or they go here, they go there. It's all just designed to help you deal with your emotion rather than confront them, right? And that's what I'm saying. The uncomfortable space that I'm in is because this emotionally opened me up. And normally, when I have these kind of things, I move on to the next thing. This was something that I said, you know what, you're going to give yourself permission to sit here for a minute. You're not going to move past here. You're not going to move past something that really shook you to your core and think you're going to be okay next year, because you won't. You won't. You can move on now and you might seem okay now, but next year you won't be okay. And I have to worry about my next year. So I'm like, this year, we're going to sit and we're going to unpack this thing so that we can move forward lightly, pack light. We're going to unpack this thing right here, right now. So these conversations have been great way for me to unpack. They've been a great way to help just unpack and have that dialogue, because if we move past this too quickly as a nation, next year is going to be vicious in more ways than one. We cannot move past this very quickly. And I think inherently everybody knows that. That's why they're taking the stand. That's why they're backing the movement. That's why they're, being a part of protest, because they understand that we can't move past this very quickly. We will get past this as a nation. We will heal. But we can't do it quick. There's no quick fix for this. There's not a quick fix for this. It's going to be slow, steady process that we have to embrace and just all be here for.
So I want to honor our, followers, because we have to, in the next 5-10 minutes, wrap it up so I can download it, post it.
Okay. Oh yeah.
So I want to know, number one, I want to know, how can we as allies support you in your community? And then I wanted to share some resources that I've been using to help with my own anti-racism journey. So let's start with you. How can we support you in your journey with this? How can we be appropriate allies without taking the spotlight away from you guys?
I think the first thing is to admit that there's a problem, that there has been a problem, and then to listen to, no matter how it's expressed, the results of that problem for the people that have been living it, right? Because part of why I never have these kind of conversations with people outside of my race, because I don't want to come across as angry. I'm not angry. I am hurt. I am passionate. Those are my primary emotions. How I express that is just comes out how it comes out. But I've had conversations even over the last couple of weeks with people. They're like, "You just seem really angry," and I'm like, "Well, the part that is really tough is that you don't understand why." Right? That you don't understand that there is a level of frustration, but the again, anger is the secondary emotion. So just being willing to have those conversations and be okay being uncomfortable. Like, don't ever make somebody else's plight, problem, issue, challenge, or something that allows you to uh, that makes it about you, right? Because even in real estate, we say that, when you're focused on you, you're never going to win. It's always focused on them. What do they want? What do they need? So coming into it with that perspective, like, okay, what do you want? What do you need? And a lot of times it's really just to be heard, right? Because again, it's a systemic problem. So you and I sitting here having this dialogue is not changing anything, but here's what it's doing. It's opening up the hearts and mind of people, both black and white. It's normalizing the conversation so we can get to an admission, so we can get to a solution. It's just a rung in the ladder that we have to move forward. It's the same thing, and I'm going to say this because I know you and I are both like really into fitness. It is the same thing with going to the gym today. You can go to the gym today. Tomorrow you will not have a six pack. Like, and for you to think that is pretty telltale of your thought process. You can go to the gym for a year and still not have a six pack because you have got to educate yourself on how your body processes fat, what foods to eat, what foods are going to burn fuel, what foods are going to add calories. You're going to have to go lean for a period of time. You're going to have to switch up your exercise where you're lifting maybe this week, doing HIIT next week, then you're combining two. It is going to be a whole process before you get there. And this is why people can lose weight, they can come down in size. But once you come down in size, then you got to figure out how to get cut. The whole thing that helped you get down in size is not going to help you get to the cuts. So if you want this, you got to go through that process. So I think when you say what can help, it's like, let's go through that process. But part of that process is going to be exchanging to figure out, okay, how do we do this? Okay, how do we drop 30? Okay, we dropped 30. So now I'm at a point in my weight loss where I'm slowing the weight loss down. Not like I'm slowing it down because I'm building muscle.
Yeah, sure.
And until I get that muscle built, when I do get the muscle built, I'm just going lean, straight lean, because that's going to cut all the fat from around it. But I can't do that out of order, right? So we want to have this big cycle of change, but we don't want to do all of the little steps that it requires to get that in order. Conversation is the little step. Coming together, figuring out what petitions we're going to create, what city council members we're going to target, what local laws are we going to work to. Those are all the little changes, the little steps that if we continue to be consistent in the progression of those things, we'll end up at a destination of change. That's the destination we're going to, but we got to remember we're on a journey. So to me, as allies, we just go on this journey together. Don't leave me to the journey by myself. Be with me on the journey.
Yeah,
There are
right.
going to be stages in the journey that it's uncomfortable, but don't bail out because it's uncomfortable, and don't allow me to bail out on you because it's uncomfortable.
Well, like what we talked about yesterday, it's like there's going to be a process of failing forward. And I think for myself and maybe for other allies, like, get comfortable being uncomfortable with this, get comfortable that it's not going to be perfect, and also give permission to, the people that you're doing this for, like yourself, for instance, give permission to you to call me out, because it's out of love, and it's when you see me acting out of integrity with what you know my intentions are. So give people permission to help you along the way with your conversation, with your thoughts or behaviors that might not align with what you're saying is most important to you.
Right. And when you do that, don't disconnect. Because what happens is, when that happens, a lot of people disconnect because it's uncomfortable. So it's easier to disconnect than to keep going forward. Like, we can still move forward even with that weird space, because eventually it becomes, we understand each other. Like, you know, when you were married, when you first got married, like, think about your first argument and how it was like weird to kind of come back together. And then now, like, we're 8-9 years in, it's like, I'll see you at dinner time. Like, it's nothing. It doesn't even ramble your thought life like that, because you know we'll be good in 15 minutes. But in the beginning, you're like, are we getting a divorce? Like, because you're just like, that was so heated. It was so tough. But the thing is, the reason why marriage is so powerful, because we've made a commitment that we're going to stay and work through that. Like, that's all an ally really is somebody that will stay with you and work through the hard stuff and be there with you and understand you, and you can work together with, and you can exchange strengths for weaknesses. Because what happens when you get on the other side of this awkward communication, the real power is in you being able to sit down with me and say, as a white woman, this is what I see, this is what I experience, and this is something that can help. And for me to be able to say, okay, let's implement that in a strategy and let's move forward with it. So now we're gaining strength because we're working together. That's the whole thing. We got to understand that at the end of the day, in order to really have something that is great, you are not going to do it in a vacuum, and you are not going to do it with everybody that looks, thinks, speaks, talk like you. And I think it goes both ways. But the other thing that is a necessary thing, and this is the most powerful thing, is we want to have conversations, and we want to hear non-Black people, white people have conversations. We talk about it ad nauseum.
Right.
We want to hear the other side. So we want to be able to have a dialogue like this where you can be honest about what goes on in your community. Like, if you ask us, we'll tell you. I mean, it might not be polished with everybody, but we're gonna tell you, because we talk about it ad nauseum. It's just like talking about what kind of coffee you're drinking. It's nothing to us, because we've had it, we have it. It's a part of our life. But when you sit across from people that don't look like you, and they're like, we don't have those conversations, you're like, yeah, you do. And if you don't, you should. And if you do, we'd like to listen in.
Yeah.
Right? Because we want to know your perspective, the conversations that are going on that end. So I think that's important. I think, like you said, the podcast that we're just talking about anti-racism, those kind of stuff, is the video I sent you from Ryan Lestrange. Hearing the white perspective is necessary, because for so long all we've heard is the Black perspective. And again, we will own that, but we want to hear what the larger population, quote unquote, has to say, because that's not been heard. Really, truthfully, people have skated around it. They've done the politically correct version of it. I want to get to the nuts and bolts of it. I want to hear like the real conversations, like, and I want people that are non-Black to be okay with that. However it comes out, just be okay with it. Because the truth is it is what it is. It is what it is. Let's just put it all out there so we can kind of move forward. So I think that's good. So when I hear stuff like those podcasts, like I know you are having conversations with your circle, that kind of is like, all right, we are finally making this normal.
Yeah, we're normalizing it. And
Right.
that's one of my goals today, is to let's normalize the conversation of racism, because the more we talk about this, and by the way, whether we do this publicly or privately, this, I'm sure more of these conversations between you and I are just going to keep happening.
Yeah.
But we need to start creating some normalcy and help this discomfort dissipate a little bit. Let's normalize what's going on. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to share some resources that, that have been helping me. And I would love to hear the resources that you want me and us to know about that maybe I haven't mentioned. Then we can get this uploaded and hear some thoughts from people.
Perfect.
Okay, so some of the resources that I've personally been diving into for my own kind of anti-racism journey. There's a book, it's called How to Be an Anti-Racist, and it's by a guy with the last name Kendi, Kendi. There's another book, I know I've seen this cycle all the time on Facebook, I'm not sure the author, but White Fragility. I think it's probably important that we, read that. A couple podcasts I've listened to in the last couple of weeks, Brene Brown. She has a couple podcasts on the subject of racism, but the one that I listened to that had a lot of really good stuff that I kind of brought up in our conversation is called How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa Urban, she posted one this last week. Her podcast is called Do the Thing, and her episode is called I Am Racist. So she goes through the whole process, essentially. She's not saying, hey, I'm racist. She's essentially going through the whole process of admitting and acknowledging that she has been part of the problem and essentially teaching all of us how to work with those thoughts, right? For us as allies. Other resources that I think are important would be to obviously support Black businesses. I know that we've seen that on Facebook. We all come from different markets, different areas. So do a little bit of local research on, look, I saw one of my Facebook friends, she was hiring an electrician and she specifically sought to find out, all right, great, is there a Black electrician I can, give this job to, or whatever the case may be. So making a conscious effort to support the people in the communities with which you're saying you support. The other one here, the other two really are, like you said, have a conversation with not only your Black friends or people of color, or maybe you say, hey, Kate, I don't have a whole lot of Black friends. Find somebody that that you can ask, hey, I'd love to have this conversation with you in a safe space. But then what I also think is important, at least for us as allies, is to make sure that we're having the conversation in our community too. Whether you're posting about it on Facebook or doing a Zoom or doing a video, yeah, that's great. But are you talking about it at your kitchen table? Are you talking about it with your family? When you go get a pedicure with your girlfriend, does this conversation come up? Or are you sitting in your privilege, essentially, of knowing that you don't have to acknowledge it, right? So actually what you've said, Cheesette, is keep the conversation going.
Yes, you have to.
Right.
And I say that because at the end of the day, you're going to only grow to the ability that you're exposed to different things. Mm-hmm. And I would say, if I could go to somebody African American's house for dinner, go to their house for dinner, right? Because being in an environment that's safe, like a office or whatever, again, I go to the office to work. That's not who I am.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Who I am is going to come out in my home. So we're not
saying is I'm invited down to Florida for dinner.
Oh, yeah, anytime. But I'm talking about we're not having dinner together. Like dinner is a breaking bread thing, that is a defenses are down thing. It's not having all this dialogue at the office. It's interacting outside of there. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I was going to say that is really important is there's two books that I think a lot of times when people think Black people, they automatically think slavery. There's a whole history for African Americans that existed before slavery even existed, going back to African kings and queens. And I would say really lean into that understanding first, because that understanding is who we really are. When African Americans were brought to this country as slaves, that's who we became. And who we now are a product of this discorrelation between who we are at the core, meaning back in the Egyptian African stage, to who we became as a result of being shipped here, stripped, and made to work to profit another race. So you got to kind of reconcile that your understanding of that dichotomy, because a lot of people, when they think Black, they only think racism. There's a whole nother culture that existed before racism, and you're not going to be able to reconcile your understanding of Black people just by studying racism alone. You have to start at the origin of anything. That's what I'm saying, that with the Constitution, we got to get to the origin of it. It's not understanding where we are now. It's the foundation of everything is important. So, and I say that because then when you look at, I have had conversations with people at work, and they're like, well, I just feel like, the ghetto is this. And I'm like, well, the ghetto is really a place of protection. because that's the place where we feel safe. But then you got to ask yourself why those kind of places exist. So I would say definitely start with Egyptian history or African history about the kings and queens of Africa before they came here, right? And I think that's important because when you start to learn that, it will give you a good indication or a picture of who we were originally. And I think that if you don't know who a person was originally, it's going to be hard for you to look at what they've become, right? Because it's just like when you look at just a superstar, let's say athlete, we always go back to, and I just got to say this because I just love Tom Brady, but when you go back and you look at his story from the beginning, how he was an overweight kid, how he played baseball, and then he transitioned to football, how when he went to the University of Michigan, he was an average player, but he worked hard, he studied. When he came to the Patriots, he was the lowest draft pick. Nobody expected anything great for him. And then when you see what he was able to accomplish, you can appreciate him more now for where he is because you knew where he came from. I feel like when it comes to African American, I'm like, do you understand where we came from? Like forget where we are. I get this whole dynamic that we have going on, but we got to reconcile where we came from so that you can understand. Part of the frustration is I was brought here and I was stripped of the things that make me who I am, and I had to adopt another culture and literally change to where I don't fit in here. I wasn't born there, but that's still part of my history, but I don't fit in here because I wasn't born here. This nation doesn't belong really to either of us as a race. So then now, how do I reconcile all of that with everything that's going on too? And I feel like that's the part of it where when I talk Black history, I don't talk slavery with my kids as far as Black history. We address it for what it is, but when we talk Black history, we're talking about kings and queens and princes and priesthoods and the land and how things were changed. But even that has changed so much. I went to Africa a year and a half ago because I just really wanted to see what this birthplace of humanity looked like and what it was like, and just we actually booked a tour with a historian. So he was with us for 6 days and he brought us on tours. And when this happened, when that happened, and the things that happened in that nation are the same things that have happened here. And it has changed the landscape to where the Egyptians they didn't even look like Black people. They don't even identify as Black people. So again, another stripping. So just understanding those dynamics, I think will really help you understand and see people in a different way. So I feel like that is like really, really important. There is a place in Ghana where it was the last port where the slaves were transferred through before, I think it's called the point of no return. That was the last place that they went when they were transitioned to the United States. But I have friends that have went, and she's like, you can still see nails stuck in the wall, fingernails from when people were begging and pleading not to be moved. And those are things that if we have to know that part, because what's going on in America is part two. So, right, it's part two.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people know that. So if I had to say any resources, I would say start with ancient Egyptian history and how that impacted us and who we were in that space, because then you will understand why, just even something as simple as, when we as refer to our Black men as kings and our Black women as queens, it's not a politically correct thing. It's a reminder of where you started from. Like, we're trying to get back to where we started from so that we can build from that point. We don't want to just be seen in the context of racism and all the things that are going on in America, because it's a lot more to us than that.
That's really good. That's the first time I've heard, of all the things that I've kind of been looking at, that's the first time I've heard go back to the origin, find out who we are and who we were before we were enslaved.
Yeah, because it didn't start here. Like, and again, going back to this nation, this is not anybody's nation but the Native Americans. Like, so, I mean, this is not a starting point for us. And that's why I think it's hard to move forward, because we're moving forward with a lot of information that is not foundational. So in order to build something, it's like me trying to build a house, but never really paying attention to whether the foundation is sturdy, whether it's cracked, whether it needs attention. And that's the part that I think that's the beauty. That's the beautiful part of it. And what you see in the United States is, because it's secondary, if you think that that's the foundation, you're going to try to start there. And it's going to be really hard because that's like the second frame of a house. That's, you know what I'm saying? So I really want to just acknowledge that part of it. So when we see, you know, women, Black women especially, embracing their natural hair, going back to African print clothing, all of that is just a reminder that, hey, you are not this. This is who you really are. This is who you were before this interruption. And we want you to be mindful of that. And it's like that kind of, if you've seen The Lion King, he said, never forget, right? It's just like, never forget that. Because if we get caught up in what we see here, we'll forget that. And we don't want to forget that. We don't want anybody else to forget that. What we are dealing with now is just a symptom, but we were a lot more prior to this. So I'm just really excited, you know, for that. So that's, I said, it's a lot of work, Kate, because it's a lot. It's just a lot. It's loaded. It's a lot to unpack.
It is, but I'm here for it, and I'm eternally grateful for somebody like you to take the time and be patient with me and be patient with us and share your thoughts and feelings, because it's been immensely valuable. And I hope anybody out there who's listening to this gets something out of it. Please, you know, I welcome any questions. I'm sure Cheesette would as well. We'd love to keep the conversation going and continue it. And really, you know, my commitment is to obviously continue doing my own anti-racism work, and also document and share some of my own aha moments along the way, because I think it's also important to give other people permission that you don't have to be fully evolved in this. You don't have to be perfect all the time in this way. You just have to try. You just have to show that you're open to having the conversation. So again, Cheesette, I thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. If you don't mind, hang on once I stop the recording, because I want to mention one more thing to you, okay? All right.